Again, welcome everyone. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Welcome to Repairing the Wounds of War, Nonviolent Peace Force in Ukraine. We will get started shortly hearing from our speakers, so just take a moment to settle in. You can also introduce yourself in the chat. Feel free to type your name, where you're joining us from, so that we can see a little bit about who you are and what brings you to this event today with the Friends Committee on National Legislation and Nonviolent Peace Force. So again, welcome if you're just joining us. This is Repairing the Wounds of War, Nonviolent Peace Force in Ukraine, a special event hosted by the Friends Committee on National Legislation for International Day of Peace. We'll get started in just a minute, so please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know your name, where you're calling in from. If you want to share anything that inspired you to join today's event, we would love to see a little bit more about who's joining us on Zoom today as we settle in and get started. Welcome, everybody. All right. So I'm going to get us started today. If I can just ask Felicity to take down the slide for just a moment while we open up, we'll get started. All right. So hello and welcome, friends. My name is Sarah Freeman-Wolpert. I'm the Deputy Director of Strategic Advocacy at the Friends Committee on National Legislation. And I want to welcome you to today's special event to mark International Day of Peace. Thank you for joining us to learn about the Nonviolent Peace Force and their work in Ukraine. We have some amazing speakers that we're going to be hearing from today over the next hour. And we're looking forward also to hearing your questions and to learning more about this important work that activists with Nonviolent Peace Force are doing in Ukraine. So I also want to give a special welcome to our three speakers, Felicity, Yulia, and Bella with Nonviolent Peace Force. We're really thrilled, especially that Bella and Yulia are joining and calling in from Odessa in Ukraine. Grateful to have them here joining us and looking forward to hearing more about their work and some of the stories about the work that they're actually doing there. So with that, before we kick off, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Tim Heischman, for a couple of tech reminders so that our tech can run smoothly today, and then we will dive in and get started. Tim?
Thank you, Sarah, and hello, everyone. I am Tim, and I'm the Leadership and Training Manager with the FCNL advocacy teams. I'll be running tech support for the event. So here are a few tech considerations before we get started. Feel free to say hello in the chat. We'd love to greet you, and if you could share your name, where you're joining from. This is a way for us to start to build community virtually, and it's fun to see who's here in the chat, and we're so glad you're here. As you can see, we are recording the event, but the audience will not be included in the recording for privacy reasons, just the speakers. Even so, feel free to turn off your video if you're uncomfortable keeping it on. Captioning is available automatically. If you do not want to see the captions, you can click on Live Transcript on your Zoom toolbar and click Hide Subtitles. And one more note about renaming. If you have a name like User or iPhone, if you could rename yourself with your real name, that would be lovely. And we'll have some time for you to ask questions towards the end of the event. We'll do our best to address as many questions as we can and as we have time for, but we likely won't get to all of them. So please submit your questions in the chat and we'll direct them to panelists. If you're calling in on the phone today, you can press *9 to raise your hand if you have a question you would like to ask during our Q&A portion. We will unmute you and then invite you to ask your question via telephone. So please contact me if you're in need of any Zoom tech support. I'll put my email in the chat, or you can private chat me on Zoom. And we're excited you're here. So back to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Tim. It is so good to see so many faces here joining us, familiar faces and new faces. So welcome again to everyone just joining us on Zoom. Before we turn things over to our panelists to learn about their work and to hear some questions also from everyone here in the audience, I want to just turn things over to Bridget Moix, FCNL's General Secretary, to share a sort of opening welcome message and to talk a little bit about what this work means to us at FCNL. Go to you, Bridget.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Thank you all so much. It's just wonderful to see 118, 120 people on this call to join us today for Peace Day. Happy International Peace Day to everyone. At FCNL, we want every day to be Peace Day, but it's wonderful that there's at least one day that the whole international community recognizes the critical importance of building peace and working nonviolently in the midst of conflict. I'm so happy to also thank our guest speakers today, Felicity, Yulia, and Bella. We're so glad that you're here with us, taking time out of what I know is very critical and important work in difficult times to share with us and to share the practical work that is being done in the midst of the war in Ukraine, to build peace, protect civilians, create more space for the opportunities of peace building. And at FCNL, we have had this slogan, war is not the answer, that you see behind me for more than 20 years now, since 9/11 and the invasions of the US into Afghanistan and Iraq. And one of the questions we have always had, and that certainly with the invasion by Russia of Ukraine, we heard again was, well, if war is not the answer, what is? And the work that our guests are doing is a big part of that answer. It is how we can work in the midst of violence and war to create more space for nonviolence and peace building in practical ways, day in and day out. So I just want to say a huge thank you, a welcome, a happy Peace Day, and I look forward to hearing more and seeing how we can support all the good work that you're doing. Back to you, Sarah.
All right, thank you so much, Bridget. So without further ado, I'm going to first turn things over to Felicity Gray with Nonviolent Peaceforce, and then Felicity will introduce our two speakers, Bella and Yulia. Felicity Gray is the current Global Head of Policy and Advocacy at Nonviolent Peaceforce. She previously worked for NP as the Startup Director in Ukraine and as team leader in South Sudan, which was in the largest displacement camp in the country. In addition to this experience as a practitioner, Felicity is an academic and an expert in unarmed civilian protection. Her PhD research on this topic includes field research in Myanmar, Lebanon, South Sudan, Europe, and the United States. And she holds a master's in humanitarian action from the Australian National University. So Felicity, thank you so much for kicking us off today, and I will turn things over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Bridget, and thank you to everyone for joining us to celebrate International Peace Day. It's a real privilege for us to be able to share the important peace work that our organization is doing in a really difficult setting today. And I hope that the reflections from myself and my colleagues, Yulia and Bella, offer some hope that there is possibility of nonviolent response, even in the most egregious of violent circumstances. So quickly, for those who don't or haven't heard of Nonviolent Peaceforce before, we're an international non-governmental organization who focuses on civilian protection and specifically building peace alongside communities themselves using nonviolent methods. We have 8 different country programs all over the world. And because we really work hard to listen to civilians themselves about the nonviolent work that they're already doing and the specific needs that they have in the different circumstances of violence that they're living in, our programming can look quite different depending on where you are in the world. So in the Philippines, for example, we have been involved in civilian ceasefire monitoring, working with different parties to the conflict in Mindanao to avert hostilities, to negotiate a sustainable ceasefire, and to peace build among communities that have previously been in conflict. In South Sudan, which is our biggest program and where we've been since 2012, we work all around the country with women's protection teams, youth protection teams, working alongside them and strengthening and accompanying them as they do non-violence work, protecting others in their community, including advocating with armed actors for greater safety for women and girls as they collect water and firewood so that they can cook for their families, to youth gangs in Juba POC who recently negotiated and came to a peaceful resolution with armed police that they'd been in conflict with for many, many years in Juba IDP camp. It's perhaps easier to imagine how you apply nonviolent methods like protective accompaniment or protective presence or early warning and early response in civil war contexts like South Sudan or Sudan, where we also have people working very hard in Darfur. And when Russia invaded Ukraine in February last year, I think there was equal amounts of desire to see what Nonviolent Peaceforce could contribute to responding to the crisis that Ukrainian civilians then found themselves facing. And at the same time, I think there was a lot of skepticism about the role of nonviolence in an international armed conflict where a lot of the threat is coming from, not from the guys with guns, as has been the Civil War tradition more recently, but from missiles and from shelling and really heavy military machinery that civilians in Ukraine were being harmed by. It's very hard to peacefully negotiate with a missile. And so I think there was a lot of skepticism in March last year when NP arrived to do the initial assessment for our programming about what value add a nonviolent protection approach could have. And I'm happy to say that those of us who really understood and believed in that response, including Bella and Yulia, who've been there from the very start of our setup last year, I think we've been proven right that these nonviolent methods and strategies that communities are using, that NP can help support, are really having an impact on civilian lives in Ukraine and in keeping people safe. So I've put here on the slide some of the key activities that we've been involved in Ukraine for the last over a year now. Julia and Bella will share some stories from their perspective and more specifically about what these look like in practice. But once we were in Ukraine and once we spoke to civilians themselves, it became clear that there are a lot of entry points for effective, unarmed and nonviolent action in Ukraine that can make a difference for civilians who are experiencing violence. That so far has included working alongside Ukrainian civil society and humanitarian groups so that they can do their work as safely as possible. We've been doing a lot of training with volunteer groups who might not have access to things like flak jackets or helmets or understand how to respond to a serious trauma case so that they can be really well equipped if and when they're faced with direct violence in the course of their work. We've been actively involved in evacuating civilians from frontline areas, making sure not only that those civilians can get out safely, but that they have access to services and support once they reach a safer location. We've been doing protective accompaniment. So a lot of people who fled their homes very quickly didn't have the documents that they needed to access banking or humanitarian services, or to even move through checkpoints, of which there are many in Ukraine. And so we were able to work with local partner 10th of April, who do legal advice to and negotiate to safely move people through checkpoints, to enable them to reapply for documents so that they can keep themselves and their families safe and supported as possible. A large part of what we've done is shining a light on the impact of war in Ukraine through the advocacy that we've been doing. In many of the areas that we work, we're often the only protection actor. And so that's a really important job in terms of highlighting the impact of shelling, the impact of this war, the impact of unexploded ordnance on civilian life, and calling for the international community to do more in that space. Yulia and Bella are going to talk about the coordination hubs that we have helped establish and support for volunteer groups. And then one of the other key pieces that FCNL often speaks about in the course of their advocacy, as well as us as partners, is the importance of conflict sensitivity and building in peace-building principles to the way that we respond to violent crises like the invasion. And Yulia and Bella again will talk about the impact that that is having on Ukrainian society itself and the need for peace and nonviolence to be a real part of how we operate in those communities. So from a very small start, we now have an incredible program of almost 50 staff, including many, many more volunteers and civil society groups in Ukraine. We work along the southern and eastern areas of Ukraine. We're headquartered in Odessa. You can see that they're in the south. We've had long-standing programs in Mykolaiv and Kharkiv, both areas that were very highly affected by this conflict. As soon as Kherson was deoccupied or liberated at the end of last year in November, we were able to move really quickly to identify the protection needs of civilians and their safety needs and set up a program there. And then most recently, in the last couple of weeks, we've been able to set up in the Donbass, in Donetsk, with an office in Izium, serving Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. And this is so important. It's one of the hardest hit regions of Ukraine. And so to be able to have that presence really expands our impact. What I'm going to do now, that you have a broad sense of what we're up to in Ukraine, is hand over to Yulia and Bella, who are both incredibly experienced protection practitioners and friends, as well as Ukrainians who really understand the landscape of protection and nonviolence in the country, and can share with you some stories about the impact that this work is having. So without further ado, I will hand over to Bella and Yulia. Just let me know when you want me to change the slides.
Yeah, thank you, Felicity. And hello to everyone. It's a pleasure for us to be present here and to share some stories from Ukraine and from Odessa, and maybe some, I will start from very beginning of our stories and how we begin this work and how we were starting our work with Nonviolent Peaceforce here in Odessa. So my name is Yulia Timchik, and I'm originally from Odessa. I was born here and I live here more than 30 years. So I would say that our lives changed last year, and now and still every Ukrainian living in two different realities. One of these realities is the reality with the war, missiles, and sometimes without electricity, water, or whatever is happening in our day-to-day life. But in the same time, we're like trying to live in and having our own lives and doing the things that we used to do before the war. So we're just trying to observe ourselves, how this conflict impacted on ourselves and our lives. Because if we would talk about Ukrainian society, about the conflict, we should start from the place that everyone is a human. So we're feeling fear. Sometimes we're feeling very encouraged ourselves. Very often we are very united, and we know what we wanted to have one dream for all country. It's peace. And it's very important for us that today, on this special day for peace, we will talk about how we see what's happening here in Ukraine and how our work could little bit, step by step, support peace building in Ukraine. And I will give a word to my colleague Bella also to tell about her story a little bit, and then we will talk more about our work.
Yes, hello. Thank you for invitation to this great event. Really, it's an honor for us to be the participants of such an interesting event. I just want to end to Julia's words that our start with NP, it was last year at the beginning of the NP's activities, and we joined to this organization because the principles of this organization, these UCP principles, are very close to us like persons, and that's why when you are on the same page with a lot of people, it's easier to do your work effectively. And from the first days, we understood how and in which ways we can work and what we can do, because we feel we know real needs of the affected people, and it's very important. And NP has a very big flexibility to change something, to understand what's happening, to try to help in the most effective ways. And maybe it's one of the organizations who works directly with one family, with one person for the specific needs, and it's very important. And it's create our reputation, and it helps us to be a reliable partner. And now, after the work of this week, if we have any requests, and if we hear request about a different kind of helps, we can decide it very quickly. And it's really fast response, because we have a lot of partners which are on the same page as we are, and we can decide really big and small and different problems of affected population directly.
Also, as Bella and Felicity mentioned, there is a lot of response on the ground. And one of the main things that we're really happy to help with and to do with it, almost this, every second person in Ukraine from the start of the war was a volunteer. So can you imagine a whole big country in Europe where more than 42 million people were volunteers? They never do humanitarian work. They never know how they're supposed to answer to some issues and how to communicate with other people or how to deliver any aid or assistance. But there was this very fast response when we understood how we should work. And when we meet NP and also Felicity here in Ukraine, we didn't know about unarmed civilian protection. And for us, it was very important to understand that all the principles that was included in UCP, almost all of them were in real life doing by lots of volunteers inside of Ukraine. They do not know about those principles mostly, but they were doing this work. They were collecting all the necessary assistance information, and they were doing this to the front lines, to the people who was in most of the need right here and right now. So that's why we, as when we joined Nonviolent Peaceforce, we had this flexibility, and we saw how we can complement to contribute to support of this local response. And one of the I'm saying that one of the superpowers of our staff and our organization is that we are people who can really carefully hear for others. And we know, like, when they're talking to us, we can hear what they're saying. So the same was with lots of our activities that was developed inside of Ukraine. This flexibility show us that we can do programs which goes from the ground. Because unfortunately, a lot of the humanitarian response that was bring to Ukraine, a lot of international organization came to support and to help Ukrainians, but they didn't know the context of Ukraine. They know a lot of different contexts, but Ukraine was totally different, with totally different needs, and different issues that we were facing here. And we're supposed to learn from each other how we can voice up what's happening on the ground and take it from those volunteers and those people who were doing this like a first responder to the conflict. So one of the programs that I wanted to share with you, it's the latest one, and we are starting to implement it in Ukraine. It born from the volunteers that we are working with, and it's born for those volunteers and local organizations that are working on the front lines and hard to reach areas. First of them, you could see on your slides, is Volunteer Resilience Program. It was developed, as maybe lots of you were seeing a lot of information what happened in Ukraine. And one of the main issues, none of the Ukrainians, none of the people who reside in Ukraine, not feeling them psychologically okay. From time to time, all of us need to have support from someone. And not all of us can receive this support from family or from someone close that we are having. And most of them, volunteers, who was those people who said that they will be here for all of the rest people to help them. They even didn't recognize themselves as the people who need this support the most, because you could share only when you're feeling with something. So that's why we recognize that we can support those people with online and offline programs, with like psychological programs. As I was saying, there was a lot of programs for civilian population, but none of them was covering those people who was supporting this civilian population.
Yes, and next program is volunteer insurance program, and it's also very, very important because the lives of volunteers is under risk every day, especially when they work on the hard to reach areas, at areas next to the front line, and it's so important. And also one of the programs I want to mention is conflict mediation, conflict resolution and mediation programs. Can we change this slide? Yeah. Yes. And this program also comes from the ground. It comes from the local organizations and volunteer communities. And it was our answer to their request about high level of burnout, high level of conflicts, which they faced when they work with affected population, even in their communities. And we decided to provide this program. And also we provide this program to the National Guard. It's a part of our military forces. And it was really very interesting experience how important it to provide such programs like mediation and conflict resolution for the different types of audience of the civil society. And we are sure that these programs are like a first step to the peace building inside the country. And we think that we will continue that because we have a lot of requests from different organizations that they wanted to have such programs, that they wanted to have such knowledges in their, not only in their work, but also in their life.
I also wanted to add that when we start talking about conflict resolution or mediation or something like this, we were saying to a lot of our colleagues and a lot of different organizations, most of them were saying like, is it correct time to start such processes? As we are now in the phase of very big conflict, so we're somewhere in the heart of this. Do these programs are in time? Maybe we should start them after conflict will be over. And for us, it was very sometimes frustrated question. And as we experience answers from our colleagues and from our partners, we were observing and seeing that this work should be started even much more before we get into this maybe conflict or even at the beginning of this. And when we are talking about social cohesion and work under the first step to the peace building, it's important to understand that it's not only about two sides of the conflict. I would say that imagine that you live in such a unsure world for almost 2 years, and you try to be brave, you try to be strong, but nevertheless, and sometimes you're facing a lot of things in your life, and sometimes you're facing for example, one of our trainings was settled up in Mykolaiv, and we had the trainings for volunteers, for first responders, about social cohesion and like nonviolent communication. And we were, when we received the answer from those volunteers that they recognize themselves in very high level of anger for people who lived Mykolaiv while it was very heavily shelled. They understood that this feeling is not good feeling for them, but they cannot handle themselves. They just saying like, I recognize this and that I need to do something with this. But still, I'm feeling that I was here protecting my home. And now when people are coming back, because Mykolaiv before, it was before the liberation of Kherson region, Mykolaiv was on the front line of shelling. So it was shelled every day. A lot of people were dying every day. So they start working with those, with their feeling, because they can observe the situation and start asking themselves what to do next. And when we heard these stories on our trainings, it also was indicator for us. So we supposed not only Nonviolent Peaceforce, but other organizations also, they need to provide this safe space for dialogue, safe space for people sharing. And this name more wounds of war. It's one of biggest wounds of war. And in every city, in every region of Ukraine, it would be sometimes similar, but very often they would be different. So how to work with them? We supposed to find the places find the tools, how to show them that they can work with themselves also. And that was our trainings on conflict resolution and mediation and a little bit of non-violent tools, yes. And that was crucial for us, like for me and Bella. We were advocating for those meetings and for those places to get them together very much, because we can see how it useful, and how it helps sometimes even just to tell about your feeling and what's happening with all of us and with those people who was on the front lines to support the civilian population.
And according this, we had idea, and I hope that we will realize it in the nearest future. It's on the final stage. NP will help to create in Ukraine volunteer hubs. It's spaces for the volunteers, for the local organizations, come together, decide very sensitive questions, to have this space for sharing experience, sharing their feelings, and to have this consultation, to have this supervision in a different questions, in a different topics which are relevant for them. And one more of our activities.
Could I add before we will move to the other activity, I just want to highlight, about the National Guard. For you, it's visualization, how we in the real life here in Ukraine could already work with unarmed civilian protection with armed forces, because National Guard is one of the part structures of armed forces of Ukraine. And they was reach out to us when they hear that we having those conflict mediation and resolution trainings for volunteers and for local organization. They directly reach out to us and ask to provide this kind of training to their staff, because they observing that this strategy could work also inside of armed forces structures. And as I see, and as I guess, it would be great experience if we will continue work with this kind of structures to show them how in other ways we also can provide peace building in Ukraine. Thank you. Next slide.
Yes, and what is also very important for Ukraine, for Odessa region especially, it's bringing people together for special events. We had experience when we organized our first event, network and partnership meeting, after only 1 month when NP was opened in Ukraine. And it was a meeting when the different organizations, different humanitarian actors came together, and it was like they saw each other first time. They worked shoulder by shoulder all this period when the war began, but they saw each other at the first time, and it was really very helpful, because after this event, we know real examples when our local organizations find their partner, and now they exist because they have this support. And it's not only about finance, but it's really very important, because the lack of finance is now it's one of the problems for these small organizations, but also because they have their partners, their resources, their support in the capacity building issues, and so on. And the next event, which we organized on the June of this year, it was a panel discussion about localization of humanitarian aid in Ukraine. And it's very sensitive topic, because before this event, it was really not understandable thing for the local organization. What is this localization means? in reality, how they can work with international actors, how they can be their partners, in which rules and conditions, and so on, a lot of questions. And we saw that this topic of localization is now really on the top of the mind of the not only for locals but also for internationals. And we see that after this discussion, it was very interesting events in Kiev, and like a result of this localization panel was a working group about organizing Ukrainian NGOs Alliance. It's a really huge community. Maybe it's a first in the Ukrainian history when the local organizations are come together for creating one structure for strengthening their voice, not only in Ukrainian informational field, but also for the international actors, international donors. And now they can, it's like visualization that we can work together, and we have really very clear understanding what we want and what we want to do in the future, now and afterward also.
Just to add 2 more points from me, I also would like to tell that we are as a Nonviolent Peaceforce here in Ukraine doing a lot of work through the partners that we have in here, local organization and volunteers. So we are supporting the smallest one and those who is on the front lines with support that they needed the most. Felicity was mentioning about the physical protection for those people who's dealing with everyday work on the front lines, where they're supposed to have this personal protective equipment. And also we're supporting this organization even just to have fuel for the cars that delivering humanitarian aid to the hard to reach territories where not so much of people are willing and can go to deliver those aid. And also to support those volunteers who, like, they also people, they haven't families, to support them with the small stipends, volunteers, we call it volunteer stipends. So they have like not big money for like food and like road, other things, yeah. And it's from the point of view how we're supporting our partners here. And the second one about those events that Bella was saying about, that we were facilitating here in Ukraine. It was also one of the things that local response were saying, that they do not think conversations and events happening inside of Ukraine, like Ukrainians not coming together to talk about how they're seeing peace, what they're supposed to do and what is the recommendations. But they were seeing like how a lot of different forums and conversations around different topics, recovery of Ukraine, peace building in Ukraine, humanitarian aid in Ukraine, are doing abroad. And for sure it's good, but we do not, we have to remember that sometimes when decisions are made elsewhere, while they are coming to Ukraine as a response, sometimes it's too late for those for this response. It's already not relevant. So also we would, like, by these events we are trying to support decision making on the ground and people talking about how they're seeing these issues should be solved inside of Ukraine and share it with the people outside of Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yulia and Bella, for sharing your experiences as Ukrainians, as women in Odessa, as NP staff members, and people, you know, committed to nonviolence and to unarmed civilian protection in the middle of very difficult circumstances. So I hope that colleagues on the call can also take some of the things that you've shared and think about how they can share that further in their own communities. I'm sure that there are many people on the call, and I've seen a little bit in the chat already, thinking about what we can do to help on Ukraine and the work like Yulia and Bella have just described. We all know how much great need there is to help civilians and to provide protection to people living all over Ukraine. And at NP, as Yulia and Bella have so beautifully articulated, we're working as hard as we can to be nimble and to respond to those needs as they arise. So I have a few suggestions if you would like to do something to help Ukraine. The first is that, we began our assessment in Ukraine with a seed grant or a seed pot of money of $100,000 raised in donations from people just like you who support NP. Probably many of you on this call shared in that way. We've been able to leverage that initial investment to grow our Ukraine program to a staff of 47 with 5 officers. And more importantly, as Yulia and Bella shared, we've been able to support hundreds of local volunteers working using nonviolent action on the front lines of the war to get aid to people who can't physically get to distribution sites, to get new identification for people lost to the war, or to evacuate people from some of the hardest hit towns. And we're going to be in Ukraine for the long term. This war will end eventually. And when it does, Ukraine will face a whole new set of challenges to build back long-term peace, work that Yulia and Bella are already starting to do. By being in Ukraine now, we're able to build the relationships necessary to support local long-term peace building. And our work isn't limited to Ukraine, as I said earlier. We're doing this work in 8 different countries around the world, including other active war zones in Sudan, countries in the middle of peace building processes like the Philippines, and countries where violence is insidious despite the absence of a traditional war like the United States. So at NP, we know that while we provide protection, we also have to advance a paradigm shift in our world where nonviolence is not just a viable alternative to conflict, it's a default way of resolving conflict, both in our local communities and in geopolitical conflict. Everybody who is on this call who supports FCNL, my colleagues in DC that we work with so closely, knows this importance well. Together, we can change that narrative and make sure that there are no more wars like those being experienced in Ukraine. Together, we can continue to keep people safe until that shift is firmly in place. And we invite you to join us in this work, to visit our website, which I've provided there, to share stories of the success of nonviolent action in difficult circumstances, and to consider making a gift to NP and to support our work of protection and peace. I also saw a bit of discussion about cluster munitions in the chat and strategies around calling congressional representatives. In doing so, in opposing harmful things like the export of cluster munitions, we can also be sharing testimony about the power of nonviolence and the need to fund nonviolent support in Ukraine and elsewhere. I know that FCNL have been such staunch partners in these efforts, and I often lean on Ursula and colleagues for guidance on that. So it's just wonderful for us to be in partnership with FCNL on this. It's wonderful for us to be in partnership with you all on the call, and just grateful for whatever actions you decide to take to support this kind of work in Ukraine and more broadly to promote nonviolent responses to conflict. I've popped our website there. Yulia, Bella, and I are contactable at our emails as well. If you'd like more detailed information, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me or to pop a question in the chat. So I will hand back over to Sarah to guide the rest of the conversation.
Thank you, Felicity, and thank you so much, Yulia and Bella, for sharing. I know I've seen in the chat a lot of appreciation for your work and admiration for the way that you are all engaging in such difficult work. So we have some time for questions. I know some folks sent questions ahead of time, and I'll ask those if we have fewer questions in the chat, but we've already had a couple of questions come through the chat. So I would love to just ask some of these questions out, especially I think to Yulia and Bella, and then Felicity, of course. We'd love to hear your thoughts as well. So I know a question came through from Pamela Minden in Wisconsin, who asked, what kind of public support is NP able to provide to peace activists in Ukraine like Yuri Shelyazenko, who risk interference and possibly arrest by the government? Sorry for the pronunciation.
I'm not sure if you want to jump on this, Yulia and Bella, but I'm happy to answer if you don't want to.
We could complement to your answer.
Okay. I think, we often talk about in NP the distinction between unarmed civilian protection as a form of nonviolent action that's primary target is protecting civilians. And that sometimes does mean that we provide assistance to people who are engaging in nonviolent civil resistance, which is maybe more of a peace activist frame. I think the two goals of those different kinds of nonviolent action can be different, but obviously there are intersections, and we do that work elsewhere, including in highly restrictive environments like Myanmar and South Sudan, where we work a lot with civil society activists. At the same time, the way that we do that work is very careful, because our access is often contingent on making sure that we can maintain relationships with parties to a conflict, that those avenues for communication remain open to us. So with respect to Pamela's question, and it is a really important one that I would be happy to speak perhaps in more detail on later, the way that we do that work, regardless of whether it's in Ukraine or not, has to be very, very careful and sensitive to the safety of our staff, sensitive to the needs of the context, and safety to the needs of the civil resistance actors that might be under threat. Happy to take more questions, or if Yulia and Bella want to add anything.
I also see there's a question from Ludmilla in the chat. What nonviolent actions or efforts would be eligible for government funding?
Maybe I can jump in on that from a more US perspective to help Bella and Yulia out there pretty well focused on what's happening in Ukraine. There are so many different funds and efforts at atrocity prevention that FCNL and NP and others like Alliance for Peace Building, of which we're both members, are actively involved in lobbying for in Congress. So although as has been demonstrated in the chat, we're often in opposition to actions that we see as especially harmful, like the use of cluster munitions, we can also be advocating for positive contributions, things like the conflict sensitivity fund, things like the atrocity prevention fund. NP receives quite a lot of money through the Bureau for Humanitarian Affairs, which has run out of USAID. So the more that we can increase the US's positive engagement with peaceful actions that contribute to peace rather than reinforcing a military response to conflict, I think the more we can see growth in these kinds of programs and greater effectiveness for nonviolent action, because they have access to more resources. There are a lot of people on this call that probably know a lot more about what that balance looks like in the US than I do. But we all know that military action receives a whole lot more investment than any kind of peaceful alternative. So if we're really serious about unarmed civilian protection, about nonviolent action, then we need to start putting some serious investment in that respect. Perhaps Ursula can jump in on that too if she has anything to add from an FCNL perspective.
I just put in the chat an action that you can take to urge your member to invest in atrocities prevention and a couple of those other accounts. I'd also invite folks to join us this November in DC for our Quaker Public Policy Institute an annual meeting, where we will be gathering in DC to lobby Congress on increasing investment in these accounts all together in November. Thank you.
Thank you both. I'm going to take this question from Judy Danielson in the chat, and then we'll go to our friend with the raised hand. Judy wrote, I've read about the resistance of right-wing sectors in Ukraine to any negotiations or attempt at a settlement. Are you feeling pressure and opposition for your work?
That might be a good one for Yulia and Bella, about some of the challenges or pressure that you might be getting or not to NP activities.
Fortunately, we haven't any type of pressure, and we are working with all humanitarian actors, which includes also authorities, local NGOs, international volunteers, activists. So I think the main, maybe it's one of important things that NP has such possibility, like bring people together and create and connect them and create this atmosphere and trustful relations. And it's very important, I think, for us, and not only for us, but also for other humanitarian missions. Ukraine is very friendly and very appreciate everything and every type of help that we receive from our international partners.
Also, I can add to this. So just to be on the same page for all of us, we need to understand that in Ukraine, the governmental structures in the meanwhile of the war, they understaffed very much. So they were unresourced before, and through all this period, they're really understaffed. So every help and support that they are receiving now, it's very friendly, and they're like going into the deep conversation, and they're supporting efforts that humanitarian are bringing to the table. And the same are happening with the local organization and volunteers. We could come and exchange. Sometimes we had different opinions, like volunteer could go to the government and say about something that they're not agree with, but still it's very democratic. Yes, I would say so. Maybe that we're still on the page where Ukraine is democratic country, and this democracy is still strong.
Thank you. Okay, so let's go to Ramsey, and if you can keep your question brief, that would be great. I know we're nearing the end. We're not able to hear you. Looks like the audio is not working. Okay. Looks like we've got a little bit of a tech issue to hear your questions. So I'm going to look at maybe one more of the questions in the chat. I know that we've just got a couple minutes left, but I thought that maybe we could end, since we just have a few minutes left, to see if Yulia and Bella, especially if you have any kind of final words, calls to action for all of us. We have, over 100 people here on this call who want to support peace, who want to support Ukraine. What advice do you have for all of these folks for how people in the United States can do as much as possible to support your work in Ukraine?
Maybe I would just tell from myself that peace begin from every of us, so we need to support each other. That's the crucial. It's very easy, but that's the crucial thing that we can do in this situation. When you understand that there's no there's no other thing that precious as you having someone who could support you and who could listen to you, and maybe who can see this plant the seed of peace. Sorry for my English. If you understand, yes, what I'm saying, because peace begins from every one of us, and it's not only about the Ukraine. It's all about the world where we are living now, and how we see what will happen with us in the future. Because Ukrainians now are thinking a lot about what will happen with us in the future. Our children rising in the conflict, they're seeing a lot of awful things, and they're getting used to this. We're getting used to bad things and for everything that happened here. And maybe that will be the main thing to think about, how we can work on ourselves and people who's near with us, to support them in seeing these peaceful seeds, to support peace all over, not only in our country, but everywhere.
In a practical field, if I can add 2 words, I think it will be really very useful to support the small volunteer communities. And we have information about these organizations, so we can share this information, because for them, this support is very important. I know my colleagues from the other international organizations, when they return to their countries, some of them open their own funds, small private funds, and now they support even one family or one child group or teenagers community, because you know that in Ukraine now teenagers are really in a very high tension, under high tension, and they come together and try to create their own projects to support other teenagers, to involve them in a real normal life. And for this project, it also will be very helpful if they receive your help and your support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bella and Yulia. Thank you, Felicity. And thank you all so much for being here with us. If you registered online for this event, you'll get a follow-up email. I believe that'll go out this afternoon with a recording of this event and the links that we shared in the chat. We hope that you'll take action by visiting the website of Nonviolent Peaceforce, supporting their work. You can take action to support Ukraine through FCNL's website as well at fcnl.org. You can get involved with our grassroots advocacy teams, lobbying Congress for peace building. And we also hope many of you will join us in person or virtually in November for our gathering and Quaker Public Policy Institute advocating for peace building. So thank you again to our incredible speakers. The work that you do is just incredibly powerful and impressive. And we really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us this afternoon. So thank you all so much, and be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Peace and love all.